Introduce the ideal color management workflow in a pre-press department. Regardless where the input comes from, a camera shot, an RGB scanner, flatbed or drum scanner from earlier times, most of the images today, they are in a color space called RGB, red, green, blue. And finally, the ideal thing would be, you might have heard about the format PDF-X3, for instance. My colleague Claudia will explain that later on more in depth. In this format, when you deliver PDF-X3, you are forced to have input profiles attached to all images, and also you have to determine an output intent to this file. That means it is determined where you want to output this file, on which press conditions, like offset printing, like digital presses, like gravure printing. That makes all the difference. The point is, RGB is much bigger in terms of colors and color space as a final print would be, regardless what kind of glossy paper you have. We will see that. So you would shrink this wide gamut of an RGB at the very end when you do the decision, I want to print it in offset, for instance. We can see the typical color spaces of an RGB profile, for instance. You see that yellow line? This is presenting the space of the Adobe RGB. Everybody who works in Photoshop knows this is a kind of default profile which is attached to an RGB image and simulates the together with the monitor profile and the output profile, how the image would look after the press. The second one, the green one, is here, it's even smaller already. That's a typical camera profile, a standard camera profile, which might not be perfect, but it comes with almost of the digital cameras. They have an sRGB profile attached to it. And as you see, the white one, this is one of the biggest offset color spaces. It's called ISO-coded version 2, which is a European standard describe an offset profile. So as you see, if I would print in offset, a lot of colors going to be lost, of course. The whole gamut is shrinked into a very small space in comparison. Now a big problem is this ideal workflow, having RGB until the very end, and then you apply an output profile. This is discussed since, I don't know, 10, 15 years. And I know just a few company groups which are working strictly in those color management workflows, very successful, of course. But most of the companies I know they don't work strictly in this thing, and it has one very simple reason. Most of the retouchers, they are used to think in CMYK. They know, I want to clean up a skin tone, and they rather minimize the cyan instead of pushing the red channel from 195 to 215, for instance. They are not used to think in RGB, they're used to think in CMYK. That's the case. So the bad thing happens at the very beginning. Before they start retouching and color correction, they turn RGBs into CMYK. And all of a sudden, your color space shrank at the very beginning, and nobody knows exactly, do I really output to this press I intend now, or do I print on a maybe 6-color machine with on a high glossy paper with a huge color space? Who knows that? So as we see, colors get lost, of course, when you do this compression, kind of color compression. The technique behind that is what we call gamut mapping. We have software modules which are calculating pressing a bigger color space into a smaller one. And the algorithm and the mathematic formula behind that is what the people call rendering intent. There are different kind of rendering intents, and kind of, let's say, some just clip the bigger space off and it's gone. Other rendering intent squeezes the space into another one, and at least to keep the modulation, but it's not as good as in origin. And what normal software tries to have is the color space which is not very visible for human eyes. We cannot distinguish in very dark areas with our eyes. We rather see very small differences in bright areas, gray areas, midtones and stuff. So smart software would compress all the dark areas and would modulate them very, very compressed, and would keep the very visible and obvious part of the color space in a linear stage. You could see it, and in this graphic you would see it keeps this one here, this part linear, because this is the most obvious part of the image. This is what the people call gamut mapping. I want to introduce you to two different kinds of color management modules. One is what we just talked about, is the ICC-based color management. You have input profiles, you have of course a monitor profile to watch this image, and you got an output intent, a press, for web, for instance, for monitors and so on. So when you do this on ICC-based technique, what happens is that the intermediate color space where all the images go through is defined in LAB. The people call that profile connection space. This is a transform station where everything gets separated into another color space. It's called LAB. So it looks like it's 3 channels, and it is. It's luminance and the color described on the A-axis and on the B-axis. As long as you deal with RGB, that's fine, because RGB goes to LAB, no loss at all, and then finally it gets rendered into a CMYK offset profile or gravure profile, for instance. But what happens to CMYKs? Maybe you have CMYK from a database, or as I said, a lot of separators already turn RGBs into CMYK. So they force the CMYK going through the LAB color space, means these 4 channels turn into 3. Now imagine a lot of separators, they try to separate an image like technical devices, black fashion, black shoes and all that stuff. They want to build it up mostly dominated by the black channel and supported just a little by cyan, magenta, yellow. And so the whole shoe, the black shoe, is almost built up 90% by black. So he did a lot of effort and work into this thing, that this is a nice, really nice printed later on. No color shifts, it's just black, saturated. Goes through this color space and the black channel is gone. Of course. It goes in LAB, which is a neutral description of a color. And it comes out to CMYK, of course, again, but not as the operator intended before. It's a new black channel is generated regarding or according to the output profile in terms of what kind of UZR is used. We will come later to those things, UZR, GZR, what kind of total in coverage is described in the ICC target profile. This is how your CMYK later on looks like. There's another technique. This is ICC based. There's another one, what people call device link. A device link, well, you could replace the word link by bridge. It's a bridge between 2 devices, between the input device like a camera and between an offset press, or between a digital press, for instance. And in comparison to the ICC-based color space, this is a 4-dimensional color space. It's described in CMYK. So RGB goes through this PCS and will very much treat it like the other method, It just gets a CMYK and is, according to the output profile, the separations are generated. The CMYK goes through this space and stays as CMYK. The separations are almost kept like they have been before, of course with some corrections, like you would not print a green in offset like in gravure. You would then mix magenta into cyan and yellow. So there are color corrections done, of course, to this image because it should look like you want to. But your black separation, what we did before with the black shoes, this is kept by principle. So that's a big difference between this ICC-based color management and the device link color management. There are not too many software vendors which are creating or providing a software creating device links in a manner where you really can use them. There are a lot of stuff. I know profile maker softwares, they have those capabilities. They have an option, create device link. But it works, let's say, sometimes decent, but if you go really from, let's say, from a big color space like a offset glossy paper to a newspaper space, which is very small in comparison, they all got bad steps in gradients, they have negative effects and all that stuff. So as I want to emphasize, there are just a very few vendors or software developers which are doing a nice algorithm for creating nice device links. A device link could be, again, created in two kinds of techniques. As you see, this is a form which just gives you a source profile and a target profile. This would be a device link between an offset sheet press, paper glass number 1, to a web offset with a yellowish paper. And a device link creator also have control about the black channel. You could apply values like total ink coverage, you could define that. You could see at the left bottom says keep your black. I guess a lot of people working with ICC-based profiles experience all of a sudden that the black and white image turns to a 4-color image afterwards. That could easily happen. Then you print it and it all of a sudden turns a little reddish or greenish or bluish because the printer does not print ideal. So keep your black is one button where you know now my black and whites, they stay as black and white, and they will know the black channel will never be contaminated by any kind of other separations. GZR, UZR, under color removal, you can reduce CMY and build up the gray axis more with a black channel. These are tools of a professional device link creator. Another tool where you really control your black separation or your gray axis, where you control the CMY and the black channel separately, totally separately. So what comes out is a device link. So a device link already contains both profiles. It has the input profile inside and has the output profile inside. And the bridge itself between these two profiles can now be manipulated. I can open the device link and can do changes at the output side. We will later on see that even an ICC-based workflow does not lead to ideal values in terms of accuracy, accurate colors, delta E's, 0, and so on. We will see where the differences are. And this technique, you could never influence the output. It comes like the ICC profile is done. Of course, there are profile editors which allow you to edit the output profile and do some changes. But this is really something for absolutely color experts. It's not a very intuitive interface normally, and you can do more wrong than right. I must tell you, I know I need my glasses. I'll show you a little sample how to change this kind of device links. I can open this device link. This was, for instance, one done for an HP Indigo, which is an digital press. And I wanted to force the HP 5500 printing like an offset press, a standard European profile.